Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supergirl, Gotham, as well as Lucifer. Like always, if I'm talking about a show that you don't have any interest in listening about, look in the description down below. I include the time where I start talking about each of the respective shows that I'm talking about. For example, if you want to hear what I have to say about Supergirl, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Gotham, as well as skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Lucifer. The first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Supergirl. The first episode back since the crossover, because that was episode 8/Medusa was technically the mid-season finale for Supergirl. But nevertheless, we have Kara kind of being in a situation where she's kind of like, well, the fact is I'm up here stopping a robbery and everything. It's like, oh, that's cool and everything, but it's like, it's not, challenging enough. I'm not like really taking my time, like saving the world type of situation. Like, oh, a real big baddie challenge is like, be careful what you wish for type of situation. It's kind of coinciding what Monel was wondering. It was like, don't go looking for trouble because you're bound to find it. But, in this episode, Kara gets involved in a situation where basically a mom comes to snap her because basically her daughter's been missing for 3 days. She's going to the police. They haven't really been any help because they're like, oh, she's just a runaway. But she's like, she knows something's up. And then Kara says, like, don't worry, we'll look into it. I promise we'll get your daughter back. And Snapper kind of like, oh, you said that? And it's like, okay, we don't really need to be looking into a missing team. But really quickly, I'll add in fact this. That's the key words you never say to anybody. Like, oh, I promise we'll do X and like, insert whatever it is. Because you don't want to make promises like that because what if you can't keep that promise? And it's like, I mean, at the end of the day, she was able to keep the promise, but it's still not something you should do because it's like, you're going to hurt that person even more when you say something like that. I'll keep the promise. Like, I've seen enough stories where that kind of comes up, and it's like, you don't ever want to make that promise. Just say you do everything you can, but you never want to make a promise that you will do something exactly like, oh, I'm bringing your daughter back. So, but nevertheless, this is all connected to Roulette, who has basically been kidnapping people and using them, and like, because essentially this is all connected to like a slavery planet, specifically a slavery moon. That's basically Roulette's kind of auctioning off humans for labor and stuff like that. So that's what all these kidnapped people were about. And basically it leads to Kara finding herself on the moon, as well as Mon-El, well, on this particular moon, and Mon-El goes along with her because it's like, but it's, sadly for them, they're under a red sun, so meaning they don't have the benefits of getting, energy from the yellow sun, so they're basically on this planet without their powers. And it turns into that conversation of the fact is that, Mon-El is like, no, you gotta, it's kind of like, playing devil's advocate when it comes to Mon-El being like, the fact is that you shouldn't be so gung-ho and so optimistic, kind of like, because basically she told the people like, hey, I don't have my powers, but the fact is I'm going to do everything I can. It's like, you really shouldn't be making those promises, it's like, yeah, like, I'm not really hiding. I'm just being, almost, in a sense, being like very realistic about our circumstances. And she's like, no, the fact of the matter is like, because he's like, why are you fighting so hard for these people? And it's like, the fact that she's like, I believe we were put here for a reason. And then Mon-El's kind of like, we were lucky. That's the reason why we're surviving. She's like, I don't believe that. I'm here specifically. I've been granted these powers. I need to do my best to protect these people. Like, to give them hope, to give them strength, and be there when they can't, stand alone, to be there to give them a helping hand, essentially. Obviously, I'm adding a lot more to it because that's not exactly what you're saying. But it's kind of the point that she's getting to, and it's like I said, like, it's a situation where I kind of agree with Mon-El. It's like she shouldn't have really gone looking for trouble. She should have kind of waited for backup. But it's at the same time, it's like, her hero's instincts kicked in, and she's kind of like worried about this whole situation because she's like, she sees as a mom who's missing her daughter. It's like, how can I sit idly by when I'm knowing that that's the case? Because if I don't do it, no one else is going to look into it. I mean, because this whole thing is something big. It's not just a missing teen. It turns it out to be a case of like a whole bunch of missing people. And interestingly enough, we ended up finding out the Dominators are involved because Kara did bring them up that like they are a thing here on Earth 30A. So she's just like, oh, not these guys again. So I guess now we're going to be seeing them possibly more frequently in Supergirl. It seems like the crossover set them up so that we can have them on Supergirl. I mean, maybe obviously there's ramifications for them being here on Earth, on Earth 1, quote unquote 1, throughout the other shows. Obviously, there's probably going to be ramifications for it, but I feel like probably not big impacts, but obviously for character development and the stories that they created, obviously. But it seems like it's going to have an impact on Supergirl, because it makes you wonder like where the Dominators stand here on Earth 38, because in that particular Earth they attacked because of what Barry did, because of Flashpoint's existence. Like, it led to them attacking Earth. So something, obviously Flashpoint only affects Earth 1's timeline. It doesn't cross over, the multiverse. So I'm guessing it's kind of setting them up as kind of being future antagonists, because it's like, still, I'm sure Cadmus is going to pop back up too soon enough, but nevertheless. It seems like they're the ones that were buying people, but Kara wouldn't let them kind of get what they want, and they ended up attacking her, and still, like, everyone's like, yo, even without her power, she's here defending us. She promises to get us home, and they, the people there get together and kick butt and end up taking, control. They end up escaping. And then there was a situation where one of the aliens pointed a gun at Kara, and Mono, trying to be brave and everything, they points it at, it ends up pointing at him, and then one of the Dominators comes up and is like, no, he can't be harmed, and then it bows to him, solidifying my point. Mon-El has to be royalty. Like, there's multiple things throughout this episode that kept referencing the fact that he might be royalty. Well, for one, the whole conversation about slavery, because apparently that was a thing on Daxam, and then like Kara's like, oh man, I completely forgot about it. He's like, hey, that was something that I stood against. Like, obviously, like, you could argue, it's like, well, he could easily be a citizen, because he was part of the royal guard or whatever, to be like, oh, like, I didn't really care for that, aspect that everyone else was for. But the way he said it to me, I already had the thought of him being, a prince. So in my mind, it's like, the way he said it to me made me think like, oh, that's something an official would say. Like, he would be like, yeah, that's a stance I was like completely against. Yes, you could argue, like I said, it's still something. It could be like, oh, he's a regular citizen, so that's where his beliefs stand. But I just feel like the way he said it, it's like, oh yeah, I'm an official. Even referencing that, he's like, oh, well, what about the prince on your planet? He's like, yeah, that prince, he wasn't that good. It's kind of like something Mon-El ends up bringing up is like, he wants to be a hero. He's inspired by Kara. I mean, there's multiple reasons why he wants to do it. Because for one, he likes Kara, and it's just like, But even though he likes her, he's always been reluctant about being a hero thing. But seeing her, the way she inspired those people to fight back, it inspired him. Because I think the fact is that he wasn't a good prince. And I think that's also why he also says, like, hey, like, I was lucky. It's because he was born a prince. That's the only reason why he escaped. Because if he was born just any other citizen, he would have been on Daxam when, it met its fate as well. So I'm thinking that's why, like, because he wasn't that good of a prince, I guess he feels like he wasn't there for his people when they needed him. Probably even during that, not just in the crisis that ended up leading Daxam to being the way it's in, the state it's in, but also because probably during his, time as a prince, he wasn't the best person. So he wants to make up for it by becoming a hero, which side note kind of, well, I won't go into it because I brought it up before, and I'm like not going to dive too deeply into it because it's basically spoilers for him. Like, granted, like, I don't know that much about him. The little bit I know about him as a Daxamite is the fact is, like, I don't know if that's true about him being a prince, but definitely like who he becomes when he obtains a superhero persona. I already know because of Superhero Smackdown. Like, that ended up teaching me stuff about him, so I kind of know those aspects about him. But for anyone that might be listening to this day isn't well versed in it, I'm not about to spoil it. I'd rather it be kind of a surprise. Like the whole Guardian situation, I saw that coming because they talked about like that being where Jimmy's storyline is going to go, which I'm very like I appreciate. I'm surprised Kara didn't come away from that situation with a different opinion. Like, she's still kind of on the fence about the whole Guardian thing. It's like, oh, he had to be there to save the day. It's like, dude, I'm the one that like had to dodge like 2 missiles coming one. Well, she dodged one and ended up getting hit by the other. But she's like, so I caught one of the dudes and he caught the other two. It's like, I could have handled that myself. I was like, because literally I was thinking like, I'm surprised you're saying that, because I was thinking like what was going to happen is she was going to have a different appreciation for vigilantes after meeting Oliver. But then again, I hope they're not doing that. They haven't referenced it yet. So it's part of me thinking like, are they doing a Flash crossover here where it's like, technically like she's not really bringing up the factors of where she went or what she did, because that's literally what happened with Flash. Like, there was no like continued conversation about, oh yeah, Barry, about you going to Earth. Well, at the time wasn't sure what Earth it is, but now we know Earth 38. So I don't know. I hope they're not doing that. I hope they do reference it a little bit more. But then again, they do reference it by the fact is that she sees the Dominator. She's like, oh, not these guys. And so it's there, but it's like, it makes you wonder, does anyone else really know about her experiences? I mean, it's probably been some time since the crossover, just like it has been, television wise. Within the show, it's probably been a while. So she's probably already regaled everyone about the tales of what went down. Multiple things to kind of go over. One, I love the fact is that there's such thing as a sun grenade. It's basically like, that's such an amazing thing. I wonder, has that been in the comics or not? Because there's plenty of situations where Superman's been out without his powers because of probably a red sun situation. So that's like super handy. Apparently that's something that's been lying around. I mean, I've never really had a reason to use it, but man, that's super handy to have around just in case it's like, oh no, you blocked the sun. Oh wait, let me use this sun grenade like that creates like a little explosion, like kind of lets her absorb some sun energy to fight. That's pretty awesome. Two, Alien Joe. Apparently he knows the human language because of the fact is that he dissected a human in the past. Just a small part in the episode. To me, I feel like he's going to turn into something else. I refer to him as Alien Joe, which is very, I guess you could legitimately think of that as racist because it's like, oh, I don't have to point out the fact he's an alien. I could just call him Joe. So I do apologize for that. No, legitimately, I was like, I don't need to just bring that up. It's not like I refer to, cars like, oh, Alien Supergirl or Alien Car. It's just like I call her Car Supergirl. So I should give the same latitude to Joe as well. But it's such a minor thing in the episode, and he comes back with them at the end of the episode. So I'm like, is that going to turn into something? It's like, he plays such a small part in the episode. Granted, he helped them out and everything, but I'm like, maybe he's going to play I hope it's not a situation like, oh, you brought him back to Earth, and it turns out that he's a douchebag, that he's actually a bad guy. But hopefully that's not the case. Another side of this episode was about Win. Win is kind of like, basically he helped Jimmy out in the beginning of the episode. He ends up knocking one of the guys out. He's like, oh man, I was so awesome. Ends up getting knocked out, and the guy points a gun at him. The situation has Win freaked out. He's like, I don't want to work with, hey, I can help you, Jimmy, do the whole Guardian thing, but I'm going to work from far away. I'm not about to get involved in it firsthand, because it terrified him. Because because it's a situation where it's like, all fun and games. It's like, yeah, we're being a superhero. I'm helping the superhero and everything, until it got real, because it was like, he could have died if Jimmy had just been like a second or two later. He could have died. So it's understandable why he'd be terrified. And then Alex talks to him later. It's like, okay, you're going in the portal with me to rescue Kara. It's like, excuse me? No, I'm not good in this situation. It's like, I understand. Like, you think I wasn't scared the first time I went in the field. It's like, but the fact is that Kara needs your help, and I need your help, because it's like, if we go over there, obviously the gate's going to close down, but we got to make sure we have a way back. And you're like the tech dude, so obviously we're going to need your help on this. And then she leaves him by himself and everything, and he's like, wait, you're leaving me? She's like, you'll be fine. He's like, okay, I'm not going to be the red shirt. I am not going to be a red shirt. And then he ends up kicking the dude's ass with the rock, and he's like, I did it. I'm not a red shirt. You're the red shirt. Just being super excited, and I loved it. And then later on, talking to Jimmy, like, he kind of, reinstilled his confidence, because he lost his confidence because of what happened, because, he'd never been in a situation like that before. But it's just kind of like, it's nice to see him kind of, come back from that, It's not the easiest thing to come back from. It shakes your confidence a little, because it's like, oh, what am I doing trying to be a hero and everything? I'm not the hero. Obviously, Jimmy's got the training and stuff like that. I'm the tech dude. I should just stay where I'm supposed to be. But it's like, no, the fact is I showed that I can hold my own. So it's like, the fact is I can help, Jimmy do what he needs to do. And kind of a side note with Roulette. The fact is, we didn't see her at the end of the episode. Obviously, they were like locked behind that prison or whatever, but we didn't see her at the end of the episode meeting, so she probably found some kind of means to escape. It does make me wonder, is she going to join forces with the people that are after Mon-El? Because now they know that Mon-El's on Earth. They're like, where is he? Because they went to the slavery moon for that purpose of tracking him down. So once again, if it turns out that he's not a prince, I will be shocked, because he has to have some authority for someone for the Dominator to bow to him. That's what you do to royalty. So it's kind of interesting. I wonder how everyone's going to react when they find out it's like, yeah, you're in front of royalty. I mean, don't get me wrong, Kara's from a pretty important family. The Elves kind of held a little authority, but they weren't they were part of the council, or were they even part of the councils? Because that's a thing about the Krypton I never really hear much about, the other families in the whole situation. Other than the Elves, you don't really hear much about any other family. But nevertheless, I'm still wondering. I'm curious to see when that whole Magan storyline is going to come back. Because I was like, at first I was like, oh, I guess we're not going to see John in this episode. It's like, oh, John Bob's up, but he can't do anything because it's like the planet, that particular moon. There's certain things in the air that would kill a Martian, so he can't go. Hence the sun grenade. But also going back to Roulette, it's like, how much of a piece of crap are you? She's like, oh, the fact is I've stepped up my human trafficking game. It's like, dude, it's like you sucked before the way you talked about aliens being like, oh, they're less than nothing. And it's like, dude, you're an alien selling, how to say alien, you're a human selling other humans, but then I had to take that back for a second. It's like, all right, because there are crappy human beings that naturally do that already. And now she's just trying to step her game up because it's like, oh, I'm not confined to just selling humans on Earth. I'll sell humans around the galaxy. It's like, God, you suck. So there's that. Also, side note, there's that thing where Alex, when they first got to the moon and they were taking those guys down, Alex kicked ass like normal, just got them sweet moves. And also that pistol, she's like, okay, like, totally, this is mine now. And it's like, I hope we get to see that pistol in the future, because that was nice. It has like a really nice, like, she pointed it, bam, shot the alien, and he flew back. It's like, that's a really good knockback. It's like, dude, you should keep that pistol. That should belong to you. That's a main character status pistol. I'm stupid, I'm sorry. But another thing this episode was the cutest thing, and that is Alex and Maggie. To me, like, it's just the most adorable thing ever, because it's like, I can relate to that feeling, like, oh my God, you're here at my place. Like, oh my God, I have a girlfriend now. It's like, you know, having that conversation with Carl, like, oh my God, I have a girlfriend. That's like the coolest thing ever. It's like, oh my God, you're wearing my shirt. You're here at my house, like, you know, you're spending the night over at my apartment. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's like, because, you know, as we heard, she didn't really date much. So I think Maggie's like her first significant other. So it's kind of like, I mean, to our knowledge, but, you know, it's kind of like, you know, opened up her heart. She's like, she's straight up in love. And it's like, it's so adorable, because it's like I said, like, I know that feeling of, like, when you first meet that, like, get that feeling, and it's like nothing else you've ever felt. She's kind of in a honeymoon phase, just like, oh man, everything is sweet, everything is amazing. I got me a girlfriend. I'm like the luckiest person in the world, type of thing. And it's just like, because I can relate, it just makes it even more adorable. And also because it's like you see her super happy. Like, this episode, you never really see Alex like that. Obviously, this season's a big season for that, but you never see Alex all giddy, being like, you know, Cara being like, man, you're so radiant, you're acting so bright. She's like, what? No, I'm not. Just smiling. Is like, you never see Alex like that. It's like she kind of let her guard down, and she's so happy. And then when things happen with Cara, like, oh, Cara's going missing, she kind of pushes Maggie away. But then Maggie, being the smart person she is, like, yeah, I get why you did it, because it's like, obviously the person, well, Alex explains, like, you know, obviously, like, for her, she's always had to look out for her sister, and it's like, the few times that she's ever kind of steered away from that and kind of was selfish, things have kind of blown up and gone horribly wrong. So she was kind of worried that, like, oh, this is her enjoying her happiness, and it's like, because she's happy, she's being selfish. You know, it's nothing wrong with being happy, but in her mind, it's like, every time she's ever kind of been happy because she's done something for herself rather than doing something for the sake of her sister, because that's always been her job, is protect her sister, like her secret and everything. So obviously that ended up, you know, so she wanted to push Maggie away, because it's like, oh, something good in my life. It's like, oh, the fact is this is happening, and it's just going to be one thing after another. It's just like, I'm going to end up, you know, bad stuff is going to follow. So she wanted to push Maggie away so Maggie wouldn't get caught up in it. But Maggie, you know, but she was kind of like, I'm sorry, and apologize. And then Maggie also figured out, it's like, yeah, I understand, your sister, you know, was in that situation. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, your sister's like Supergirl. It's so obvious, because the way you're acting, you can only do that with, you'd only be, the only person you're like that about is your sister. She's like, plus the whole glasses thing, it's not fooling anyone. She's like, I know it's like a stupid thing. I'm like, I love it, because they're acknowledging it. Like, the fact is that everyone, you know, that's always been the thing. It's like, when it comes to like the Kryptonians, you know, when it came to Clark, it's always like, oh, why is it that wearing glasses hides your identity as Superman? It's like, everyone should be like, no, obviously he's Superman. That's why the whole persona of, like, being clumsy. It's like, oh, he's clumsy and mild-mannered. There's no way he could be Superman. You know, same principle that, you know, Kara adopted too. I mean, as we learned, like, Jeremiah's the one that kind of gave her the glasses in the first place as a means of kind of, you know, helping hide her identity. So I just love that was kind of like, I'm glad that Maggie's in the know now that she knows the truth. So that's going to be kind of interesting going forward. she was kind of like, Alex, next time you push me away, that is going to be it. So this is kind of, I let it slide this time. So it's just kind of like, they're back to being together and good. I hope it stays that way. But obviously, because that came up, it's like, obviously something else is going to come up. I don't want nothing to come up. I want them to be together. And the fact is, quick note, my little actor thing, the actress who plays her, Maggie, the actress's name is Florina, Lima, because I had to look it up again. I remembered her last name, but I couldn't 100% remember her first name. I brought this up in Lethal Weapon, but I'm figuring I'll bring it up here. That actress is actually the same actress on Lethal Weapon. Who plays Miranda, Lethal Weapon, the TV show. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Like, I didn't realize that until I was watching an episode, like, was like a few weeks back or whatever, and I was like, how did I not notice this? It's not like this is the first time she's popped up as Miranda. It's like, how did I not notice that? It clicked in my head for some reason. I don't know. I don't know. It didn't click for some reason. So overall, a very good episode, dude. Things are definitely going to intensify now that they know where Mon-El is. Whoever they are, I'm curious, who are they and why are they after them? Are they after, like him being a prince? Like, because at the same time I was wondering, it's like, is he even a Daxamite? Because it crossed my mind, I was like, what if he's actually a prince from something else? Like, what if he's some galactic prince or something like that? But then I was like, no, he knows so much about Daxam, which is like, it could be a lie, but it's like, even like talking about the Prince of Daxam, it's like, I don't know. Like, even that is kind of like, obviously, like, so he is from Daxam. So it was just something that kind of quickly popped through my head. I was just kind of thought that was kind of interesting. But I'm curious to see, are these people bad people, or are they trying to track him down because he's a prince? It's like, oh, you're the Prince of Daxam, so we need to get you back, help rebuild Daxam society. Like, maybe find out that there are some survivors on Daxam and he needs to come back. Or maybe they just want him because it's like, just like Clark and Kara are the last children of Krypton, he's the last child of the last son of Daxam. Just like John's the last, John and Magan are the last children of Mars, the last son and daughter of Mars. But kind of a similar situation. Like, maybe they're trying to price him because of the fact it's like, oh yeah, he's the prince. He will sell for a pretty penny. I don't know. I'm very curious to find out what their motives are behind what they're doing. So. Also, kind of wanted to side note the whole Snapper situation, that like Kara being like, you know what, you told me at first not to follow this story, but I was like, I did, and it turned out to be the right thing to do, because the fact is that this story ended up being much more. She's like, so from now on, I'm just gonna have to follow my heart. So just see you later, Chief. And then you see that smile on his face being like, good job, Danvers. It's like, yeah, smiling like that. You're impressed. It's just because like he probably always wanted her to investigate it, but he didn't want to be the one to tell her. He wanted, as a reporter, as a good reporter, you follow your instincts and you do your own research. And obviously she ended up stumbling upon a good story. If you got a gut feeling about something, you pursue it. Bring him the stuff later on. It shouldn't come down to him to be like, oh yeah, you should follow this lead and stuff like that. It's like, no, as a reporter, you kind of have to make your own decisions. And then, slowly but surely, Kara is finding her own way and being like, hey, like, I had my feeling about this being something and I investigated. I did a good job at it and I ended up finding out it is so much more. And just seeing him smile like that, because you don't see him smile, especially because his entire episode, he was like super like, ugh. Especially at the beginning, because Kara's interrupting me. He's like, I wanted my 5 minutes alone. All I need is like my coffee, my 5 minutes alone, and you took that away from me. So that was a nice little touch in this episode too. So overall, a very, very good episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Gotham. So the big thing that went down in this episode is we had the return of Jerome, which at first was really twisted with the fact is that Dwight was like, oh, I can't bring him back to life. Well, how do I handle the situation? He heard from the guys like, oh, the fact is they want to see his face, and he just got all twisted. He's like, oh, you gave me a good idea there, and literally just cut Jerome's face off and start wearing it like a mask. And everyone was like, hey, you're not Jerome. He's like, I am Jerome. And basically, and distinctly my mind went to like The Walking Dead, and the fact of what he says, like, oh, I'm Jerome, you're Jerome, we're all Jerome type of, I'm Negan, you're Negan, we're all Negan, so type of situation. So that was what kind of went through my mind during that whole situation. But it's just like, it creeped me out seeing him do that. I guess because in my mind, also seeing that just made me instantly go to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a movie, no matter which version of the movie. I've never sat down and watched the entire movie just because it messes with my head too much. Because I'm also a punk when it comes to horror movies. But that was just pretty brutal. This show does some weird things. Like, I feel like that's still like probably one of the most brutal things it's done. Just like literally cutting someone's face off and wearing it like that. But nevertheless, it wasn't the end because Jerome did in fact come back, and I don't care what most people say. I really like him as the Joker character. Obviously, he's not the Joker, but he's kind of like, oh, he later on influenced as the Joker. I mean, granted, who he knows? Like, this could be setting him up to be the Joker, but it's like the Joker's background is completely like hidden. They don't even know his real name. So, I mean, like I said, it's its own canon, so they can do whatever they want to it. Everyone's got their own interpretation of the Batman universe of Gotham's like. So it's like, let them do it, let them have their fun. Like, once again, you don't need to trail everything back, and that's my big problem. I can't just sit back and enjoy it. But I do like learning things because it's like, oh, I know this from something else Batman related, and it's like, oh, it's very interesting what they're doing here. But nevertheless, I really like the fact is what Jerome does when he wakes up. He's like, okay, so what have I missed? I've been dead for like I've been dead for like a year. Okay, so what happened to Bruce Wayne this week? Is he dead? Because I tried to kill him. Oh, he's still alive. Yeah, if it wasn't for Galavan. I was like, oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, Galavan's already. He's like, oh, I'm gonna get after I deal with Bruce. I'm gonna deal with Bruce after I get Galavan. It's like, well, Galavan's already dead. Who killed him? It's like, well, which time? It's like Galavan came back, and then he just steals the spotlight from me. And also the fact is asking him about. He's like, I know who you are. And like at first he's like looking, and he's like, do I? You look so familiar. Wait, do we? Basically alluding to them hooking up. She's like, oh God, no. And then basically being. And the fact is that Jerome is kind of like asking all these questions about her and Jim, like, oh, you two broke up? What? Laughing about it. Just like, oh, I thought you were so good together. It's like, I really was rooting for you. And then just laughing about the whole situation when he finds out that Jim killed Mario, her husband, on their wedding night. And she's like, really, you got time to laugh? He's like, haha, you're right. I don't have time to be laughing about the whole situation. So, and I do love the fact is that he later on gets his, face back. It's kind of interesting, the whole premise. Like, I brought it up last episode. I really like the thought, like, this whole cult situation of, like, he's influenced so many people. They've set that up and now it's paying off because he's got his own little cult. But it's not just confined to them. Like, there's people spread across Gotham who are obsessed with him. He's got his whole following. Because even one of the cops that, a cop in this episode ended up telling him. Even one at the beginning of the episode, there's that guard that was shooting at them, and the other guard, his buddy, ended up stabbing him. Just like anyone and everyone could be kind of caught up in this. Like, just the kind of madness kind of kicked in, which I thought is kind of an interesting thing. I guess at the same time, it's kind of a situation where it's like, you could argue it's like they were already kind of unstable, and now Jerome revealed himself, and it's kind of like, oh, they have an outlet now. They have someone that's like, oh, this person's out there leading the charge of just being crazy. I also appreciate the fact what Jim was talking to Dwight about, being like, basically, you're literally saying everything that Jerome said to me. You're not being original. Because even Jerome was like, oh, the guy's got no pizzazz. He's not good or whatever. Luckily for Jerome, he ended up getting his face back at the end of the episode. Before he blew Dwight up in the, essentially the power plant of Gotham. And it's basically put Gotham, like, knocked out all power, so Gotham's in the dark now, so. I'm very glad to see Jerome back because I'm very interested to see what they do with him. It is kind of interesting we get another character brought back. I hope it's not. I wonder is it going to be a situation where it's like, oh, he's brought back and then he's killed again? Because obviously I was thinking the main antagonist of this season was going to be, the Mad Hatter. But then again, it might be a situation where like, oh, maybe he'll pop up later on in the season. Well, this part of the season will pop up later on. Or maybe it was all just kind of like, maybe his story is done and maybe we'll just see it more in the future. And that this is basically Jerome's time to shine. So, I don't know, just kind of interested to see how that all plays out. And like whether because the last person they tried to bring back, the lady from last episode, she ended up kind of burning out because it wasn't a permanent situation. So the question is Jerome's situation permanent or not? Also, something else that came up in this episode, the whole Lee situation, because Lee's still super pissed at Jim. I mean, Jim's like, hey, thanks for calling that hit off on Falcone. And she's like, well, don't thank me. She's like, you're trying to stop this whole Jerome being brought back to life situation. Why don't you have them bring back Mario? And it's like, ooh. I mean, granted, that really might not help anybody because who's to say Mario won't come back still being infected by the blood and everything. But still, semantics, right? But it's like an episode where we got to see Lee kind of like receive that darker, like we've already seen like the darker side to Lee previously to this, but it's like you definitely see it kicked up in this episode because you see Jim and Harvey roughing up that cop trying to get information from him, and all of a sudden Lee walks in, injects him with something. It's like, okay, give it about 20 minutes, he'll tell you whatever he wants. And then Gordon's like, whoa, Lee, what are you doing? She's like, what? You guys bend the rules all the time. You didn't let that suspect go to the hospital. You brought him here first to interrogate him. And then I saw you and Harvey literally beating the crap out of him. It's like, yeah, that's us. We shouldn't be doing that. You're right. That we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be bending the rules. And neither should you. You're better than this. She's like, why do I have to kind of be the better one in that situation? Because it's like, being the good guy didn't get her anywhere. What's it done for her? Ruin her life. She's lost her baby. She got mixed up with Jim Gordon. Kind of like her life is kind of going downhill because of that. She lost her husband on their wedding day. So it's kind of like not like being a good guy's really done anything for her. Jim's kind of like, yeah, I get it. You can be mad at me about the whole Mario thing. That's fine. I accept that. But, because to him, it's like, at least, under the circumstances, he knows that she's all right. And that's all that matters to him. And Lee's basically like, so don't ever touch me or tell me what to do again. Because I will report Harvey for what he was doing. I was like, oh, I saw the temporary captain in there beating up a suspect. And it's like, would you really turn on Harvey like that? I mean, I'm sure that was just a threat, but at the same time, it's like, you never know in that situation. It's kind of sad because it's like, it's like, would you turn on Harvey just to kind of get at, Jim? It's kind of interesting because it's like, I mean, she hasn't quite gone down that route yet, and she might not. It's the fact is that going down the Barbara route, because it just took certain things that there was already something wrong with Barbara, just there, but it's like it just took the right person kind of unlocking that in her, which is it's so weird to think about Barbara being who she was at the very beginning, just normal girl into the kind of like sociopath that she is now. It's so weird to think about that, and that's still something. I'm surprised things haven't changed between Jim and her because of that whole like him tripping on the Red Queen and that whole I'm surprised not big has ever come about that. Like I'm surprised he hasn't really approached Barbara differently. I mean, they haven't actually met face to face subsequently since then, since he had that like Red Queen trip. Did he? I don't think he did. I don't think they have. So, but that was just kind of interesting. At the end of the episode, she calls him to warn him about Jerome. So it's like, she has like, I don't know. Like, obviously warning about Jerome because it's Jerome, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. It's hard to say where Jim and Lee stand because it's like, this seems like bad at odds, but it seems like that's kind of like a professional thing. So it wasn't personal at that point in time. It's just professional. It's just going to be interesting to see how they develop. Like, I need to really stop using the word interesting. I use it every time when I describe something because, it's my go-to word. But along those lines, we also, speaking of Barbara, we have Barbara manipulating Penguin, of course, all part of Nigma's plan. Because at first she's like, the fact is, you don't know who could be after you. There's been whispers because you went crazy. Basically, the city's kind of turning against you. It's like, should Mayor Cobblepot be mayor? I was literally about to say Mayor West, which would have been very befitting, him being Batman and everything. But nevertheless, I think it's like at the time of me saying that, I have Family Guy on the mind, but still that can trace together because it's like, Mayor on Cohol, but he was like, Batman back in the 60s. But nevertheless, that was just kind of funny to me that almost slipped out my mouth. I really didn't have to include that. I could have just went on pretending, but it's like, I want to kind of share those random thoughts with you and stuff like that pops in my head. Nevertheless, those situation is like, basically saying all these other people are whispering about you because the whole city's turned against you. And like, you basically said to hell with them. So in a sense, it's like, maybe you're not the great mayor that we thought you were. And it's like, you need to be focusing more on your crime boss, your real job, what you're doing, running Gotham as a crime boss. And basically saying all these whispers of these other people trying to take you out. Basically, Barbara and Cobblepot meet up. She's like, I'm being your friend. I'm looking out for you. Obviously, she's manipulating because you see that smile of hers after she walks away, and then he shows up and there's no one else there, and she's like, man, might as well clean house and get rid of all those guys because obviously they're planning something against you. And then Oswald laughs and I'm like, he figured it out. He's like, yeah, you think I'm stupid? You're just trying to manipulate me into turning against people who aren't against me in the first place, and me turning against them will, in fact, turn them against me. So I'm not that stupid. I was like, he figured it out. I was like, Barbara, do you really think that was work? I guess it's not part. And then they manipulated the situation by having like one of the guys be like, hey, I'm coming after you. I've got I've got Edward Nigma, so I'm going to keep him if you don't back down, essentially. And I was like, man, once again, Clayface. Then it turns out it's like, it's actually not Clayface. It's actually just Tabitha holding him hostage and basically like put him at gunpoint and make him say whatever he needs to. So now it's like, you were right, Barbara. Let me go. I got to go rescue Ed. So now he's back to thinking, Barbara's actually on the side when she's not. Tabitha kills the dude. Part of me wondered why didn't they just do Clayface, but then it was kind of like, well, maybe it's a situation where they couldn't get the actor back at that time, and it's like maybe they didn't want to use, having the special effects of doing the whole. I feel like it would have been simpler just to do him, but it was like, why waste the time pretending to be him when we can actually just do this and just get him to do it. That particular guy, Tabitha, had at gunpoint, but kills him. Barbara and Tabitha decide to wipe out the rest of them. So literally the only people left in this whole situation is Oswald, because they've wiped out all the other bosses. That's at least what they're kind of alluding to. And then you have the whole situation about Oswald being called away because Enigma's calling him, and he's like, oh, the fact is, Ed, I've got to go rescue Ed to take some of his boys. He has one of his main guys stay behind, so it's kind of sad. Like, at first I was like, oh man, Oswald's figured it out, but it's like, nope, it's still kind of falling into this trap. Because basically they want to kind of run things themselves. That's kind of always been the plan. And then Tabitha's asking Barbara, like, promise me that when this is over, once we have taken care of Penguin, that Enigma will die because of what he's done. Which still puts me in that situation where it's like, I don't know where that relationship stands, like, between Barbara, Tabitha, and Butch, because it's like, Butch is in love with Tabitha, but then Tabitha and Barbara are a thing. Maybe it's like they don't let themselves be held down by like, oh yeah, like we're monotonous. It's kind of like this is a thing. Why bother labeling it? So maybe it's a situation like that. But nevertheless, it's just something that just crossed my mind because it was like the whole reason why she cut off her hand, like get her hand cut off. I mean, mainly because I think it's because she didn't want to give Enigma the satisfaction of getting what he wanted, but also because she does care about Butch. But I said it before and I'll say it again. It's like, I'm very interested to see how at first, Oswald's going to be distraught and heartbroken because he finds out like, oh, Ed's been manipulating me this entire time. I mean, who knows? Maybe Ed will actually do the reverse. Maybe Ed will be like, oh, he'll play it to, oh, thank you for saving me, Oswald. And then he like gets closer to him, makes him think like, oh man, he returns my feelings. Ed makes, Oswald think that, he actually loves him, and then they get to that point, and then at that moment, he crushes Oswald's heart by telling him the truth about everything, or something like that. Build, a situation to build him up before you tear him down, and so, like, make him feel like you really love him, and then rip his heart out and, like, squish it in front of his face, essentially, so... Maybe it'll play out like that, or maybe he'll be upfront from the very beginning, because like he said, like it's a situation where it's like you have to beat him down so badly that he's going to literally beg you to put him out of his misery type of situation. So, and then the final note of the episode is finding out about Maria, because there's a whole situation with Cole. It's like he's asking for money. Cat's not okay. I mean, I guess because Catwoman and being connected to cats and the whole situation. So of course I meant to say Selena, sorry. It's kind of like, what are you doing? Cole's the type of dude that will come back for more and more, which is like, my mind is like, yeah, that tends to be the case or something with a guy like him. So it's like, oh man, that sucks. But for Bruce, it's like, hey, we'll do this long enough until we find a way to help out your mom, because it's like, hey, you don't help me, I'll turn Maria in, because she was supposed to help me with a job, so that's why she's on the run, why she owes me money. But then lo and behold, Selena finds out the whole thing is a trick, that basically she was working with him the entire time. It's like, I had a feeling you were double crossing, like this whole situation was going to be a double cross. I mean, it wasn't expecting it in this, because I was thinking like maybe she might have been secretly working for the Court of Owls or whatever the case may be, but it's like, no, her and Cole just worked together to kind of scam money off of them. And Selena's just like, so you literally tracked me down because you found out I was dating Bruce Wayne and you knew it'd be an easy payday. It's like, screw you, mom, don't ever come back again. But then Selena got super pissed at Bruce when she found out, like, Bruce is kind of beating around the bush. He's kind of like, no, I had my thought. She's like, did you know? He's like, yeah, I knew. He's like, it was kind of the logical thought behind everything, and kind of piecing it together. Which is like, look at you, Bruce. Like I said, like Bruce has those moments of like being very, like almost being like a detective, and it's like, it's so interesting when he figures stuff out, and you're just kind of like, wow, go you, Bruce. You see a little bit of that future world's greatest detective kind of kicking in. That whole situation that sucked for Alfred too, because you see that them having that conversation, and you see Alfred kind of look down. At that point, they knew what this was all about. I think because the whole thing was that Bruce was hoping that, like, if she had the money, that obviously she would stick around, and then eventually she kind of look at the situation and be like, oh no, I like being around Selena, I like being a mother again, and And, you know, you can understand why Selena would be pissed, because for one, it's like, you lied to me. My mom lied to me. It's bad enough. But it's like, you're the one person in the world I thought would never lie to me. Two, it's also because it's like, so you were essentially kind of paying my mom to stay behind and pretend, quote unquote, pretend to love me type of thing. Um, so, you know, she has every right to be pissed in that circumstances. I mean, even more so when you break it down, she's like, you know, my mom has been out of my life for 11 years, and she literally only came back for you. Not even for me trying to be a good mother, pretending to be a good mother. It was literally all for the sake of getting money from you. I did like the fact is that little, like, she was like super pissed and hitting Bruce, and he's like blocking and dodging. And I'm like, oh, look at them, got the sweet moves. And she's like, fight back. She's like, fight me. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. He's like, I understand. You know, he understands why she's mad, and it was like, he's not going to hit her back for that. You know, because Bruce was trying to do the right thing, but he went about it the wrong way. He could have told her the truth, but he said himself, it's like, yeah, telling you that your mom didn't really come back because she wanted to spend time with you or really save your life. I mean, helping us was just a coincidence. It kind of helped solidify the scheme. And that's why I'm kind of like, well, she could also still be playing them again and actually be working with the Court of Owls, or either come back with working for the Court of, because like, there's that whole situation, like she was at the mansion and nothing came about the whole like stealing the owl thing. I mean, they've got it hidden away in the cave, but still. And it's like, it's the actress they got playing her. Once again, I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce her last name because I'm going to butcher it, and she deserves her name to be properly pronounced. But Ivana, they got such a specific actress, just like I said, once again, Anna/Carrie from Banshee. It's just like, I love it. Anyway, it's like, they give her such a specific actress to play her, so it's like, obviously she did the best job for it, but it's like, I don't know, in a situation like that, it's like, she's that specific actress, so it's kind of like, hey, you gotta, obviously she's gotta come back in some shape or form, but, I feel so bad, because I'm only referring to her as Banshee, but that's the thing I know her best from, but she's been in other stuff too, so, and the question also is, where does Selena and Bruce stand now? It's always interesting to see how they develop. It's like, oh, they're mad at each other or she's mad at him at one moment and then kind of forgives him the next. But it's kind of a hard situation to just simply like, oh, forgive someone for under the circumstances. So a very good episode, and I'm just wondering how this will all play out. Especially now that Jerome's back, the city's dark. I wonder, is that going to affect Nigma's plans at all? It's like, you can't really account for someone coming back from the dead and just kind of throwing a wrench in your plans. I do hope in some shape or form that screws Nigma over. But then again, he's a very smart dude, so he's probably already calculated it into part of his plan, so. And now moving on to this week's episode of Lucifer. Such a good episode. Like, Chloe is struggling. Well, not even just Chloe. Chloe and Lucifer are struggling with the whole kiss situation. It's like it was already happening, you know, before a little bit, the episode before last. But last episode, it was almost about to happen. Things happened, and then Cameron realized some things. Ended up, you know, Chloe ended up kissing him at the end of the episode. Chloe ended up having that sex dream at the beginning of the episode. She grabbing onto like Lucifer's horn, and then she wakes up and then she finds Maze sitting there eating popcorn. She's like, "What were you dreaming?" I'm like, "Oh my god!" She's like, "What are you doing here?" It's like, "I heard you screaming and thought you were in trouble," and then I found out it's like, "Oh, you're around here having a sex dream." It's like, you need to get laid in real life. She's like, also like, you were making that motion, you know, the motion she made grabbing the horn. She's like, "What were you grabbing on?" She's like, the fact is, you need to kind of throw caution to the wind. And that's something that, a big part of what she does in this episode, because she's trying to like, she's like, oh, she's always played it safe. She's always been this way. And she's like, oh, just, you know, to kind of, I guess, get Lucifer's attention even more. She like wants to make the first moves. But then you have Lucifer, for the first time, being very self-conscious, because he's talking to Linda, and he's been like, yeah, the fact is, oh yeah, she's probably just, oh yeah, we had a kiss, and then nothing else happened afterwards. We didn't have sex or anything. She's like, oh, you just parted ways. She's like, yeah, she needed time to breathe, obviously, because it's like we kissed, and it was overwhelming for her. It's like, oh, it was overwhelming for her. Well, what about you? She's like, you know what I'm thinking? The fact is, you know, because it's so obvious that Lucifer is self-conscious around, like, he's always been the very confident guy, to the point that almost to the point of being arrogant. Like, he's so confident, which is kind of like, arguably, it's like, well, he kind of has a reason to. But it's kind of like, what I love most about this episode is the fact is that Lucifer can't even fathom that Chloe might like him for him, because he's like, there's all these flaws and all these things wrong with me. How could she possibly like me? It's like, obviously, like, my powers have never really worked on her before, but obviously something's changed and now my powers are working on her. So I subconsciously have been manipulating her into liking me. Because the fact is, Lucifer's always joking me like, oh yeah, let's have sex, Chloe, But now that it's actual possibility, he's legitimately scared. Because he's never felt like this about another person. It's like, oh, fine and fun and dandy, and maybe he did care about someone, but never to the extent that he has about Chloe. He doesn't, as the last episode proved, he doesn't know other people the way he knows Chloe, and it's just, he legitimately is in love with her, and it baffled my mind that he was like that. He couldn't even fathom, like, she might like him he even goes with Charlotte later and was like, oh, what did you do to her? It's like, oh, if I could do something, I would, but that's kind of not my powers. It's like, and even she gave him some good advice, being like, follow your heart. These things kind of have a way of working themselves out. I'm like, that's good advice, even though I know you're doing it for the wrong reasons, but still. And there were moments I loved, like, Chloe trying to act differently. Oh, she slaps Lucifer's butt, and she's like, okay, that was weird, wasn't it? And the fact is that when they're talking and stuff like that, he makes a wisecrack, and she's like, laughing. And she's like, why didn't I just do that? And then she's like, where normally he'd make a double entendre or something, she's like, oh yeah, like, she kind of finishes for him, and Lucifer's like, okay, what the hell is up with you? She's even going like, oh man, have you ever made out in a library? Oh yeah, that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? She's like, I don't get why. Okay, you know what? I'm not getting the reaction I wanted. She's like, no. I need to know why. Like, why haven't you made a move on me or something like that? And it's just so, like, it's the first time, because he's, like, normally sex was a situation, like, he's literally commented on it, like, since the first season, like, how much he wanted to have sex with Chloe, but now the chance that it's a possibility, he's afraid to take that step forward because it's become real. And that was his fear, that this wasn't real, that it was something else that made Chloe like him, because it's like, there's no way she could like me for me. So then you had the whole conversation between Charlotte and Linda. Charlotte's like, hey, I need you to tell my son the truth about this whole Chloe situation. She's like, I don't want to know, don't tell me, because the fact is, you want to tell him yourself. She's like, I'm not going to betray his trust. It's like, no, it's not betraying his trust, it's telling him the truth. And she's like, I'm not going to do that, And then she's like, oh, so what you're saying is I have to find someone that's close to Lucifer that's dumb enough to tell him. So she's like, oh man, I'm good. And she's like, oh man, you're so helpful. Thank you. And then Linda's like, yeah, I see the similarities now. Both of them taking what Linda says and twisting it to their own needs. 2 side notes, because I have to keep doing my actor thing. One, the dude at the beginning, the actor dude, Johnny, who was told, like, oh, cut his face or whatever, which I'll kind of get to in a second. Mike Doyle, which, I've seen him in other stuff, but mainly it's like he was like one of the lab dudes in basically what Ella does in Lucifer. He had that job on Law and Order SVU, so that was the first thing I know. I kept looking, I was like, why do you look so familiar? That's why. And also, the killer in this episode was Tim DeKay. And I was looking at the mask, I was hearing his voice, and everything. I was like, is that Tim DeKay? Lo and behold, it's Tim DeKay. I was like, yeah. I couldn't help it. To me, I don't know. I think it's also because, I'm mainly obviously for White Collar, but also because, like, he was on the very short-lived, which I really liked, but Sally didn't get a second chance. He was one of the main characters in that too. So, another Fox show. So just, nevertheless. But essentially in this episode, it's about this dude, killer, Jason, played by Tim DeKay, who basically decides, like, essentially, it turns out that basically he poisons certain people ahead of time, and he makes someone else decide, like, oh, you have to make a sacrifice to save this person's life. In the case of Mike Doyle's character, Johnny, it's like, oh, to save your life because you're an actor, and, like, what's most important to you is your looks, because that's just how that's your bread and butter. He's like, cut your face, and this boy will be saved because I poisoned him. He'll get an antidote. Didn't do it, so the kid died, Ricky. And then the same situation happened later on with another college girl, and it was basically a doctor. It's like, oh, lose one of your hands and you can save the boy. And, like, the doctor even asked Dan the question, like, if you were in my situation, what would you do? And Dan was like, I don't know, because that's a hard situation, because it's like, she's like, as a doctor, I want to help people, but I can do that because I have both my hands. And then, like, but the fact is, if I don't do this girl would die. And it's like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? And she made the choice because they tried to synthesize a antidote, didn't work. So she ended up sticking her hand in the disposal, and man, was that bloody. The blood just started splattering. I was like, I was not expecting. I mean, I had a feeling she was going to do it anyway, but I was like, I don't know how she's going to do it. And then all the disposal came on. I was like, oh, is she going? And her hand's right there. I was like, is he going to stop her in time? But it's like, I was like, yeah. I thought maybe she's going to chop off her hand or something or smash it to pieces. I didn't know what she was going to do. So turns out it worked. But there was a situation later in the episode where Lucifer suggests, like, okay, we need to draw him out. Well, the easiest way to draw him out is by poking the bear, essentially. And Chloe goes along with it. It's kind of an interesting situation where it's like Chloe followed his lead on this. I mean, it's hard to say whether Chloe under normal circumstances would or not. Because the fact is, it's like part of her, probably trying to, follow one of Lucifer's crazy plans. Maybe that was what that was. Or maybe Chloe naturally would have followed it because she's like, oh yeah, it's a good idea. Granted, it backfires because he kind of pissed off at her for talking down to him, essentially. He kind of puts two other, basically calls him to escalate his plans a little bit rather than take things slow. And it's like, there's two people here are suffering. One dude has to chop off his leg. If he doesn't, the other person's over there going to die from the poison. Because this whole huge thing was about, it's like manipulating people, essentially. Because for him, Jason was like, hey, he was in this situation, there was a car accident, and basically he went back and saved a briefcase with some important information for him, rather than saving the other person that was in the car with him and it exploded and he died. That dude in the car died, and Jason basically got his world turned upside down, lost his job, his wife left him, everyone just basically looked at him and was like, oh, you're a terrible human being. He's like, I'm not a monster that people make me out to be. All of this was going to serve the point that basically, when given the choice, people would do what's in their best interest. And for him, he's like, basically, that it could be God or whatever you want to say, but he followed his instincts. Something kind of drew him to do it. Like, he even uses the doctor as an example. He's like, think about it. It's like, oh, she didn't sacrifice her hand / save this girl for her own sake. She did it because someone, Dan was there watching, so she couldn't be selfish and just do, but it's like, given the opportunity, in Johnny's case, Johnny was selfish rather than, because he thought maybe it was a prank, but it's still like, the fact is, when in her situation, she knew it was a real thing. And it's like, the only reason why she did it was because Dan was there to kind of be like, oh no, she knew that they would look at her differently if they found out, like, oh, you weren't doing it out of the goodness of your heart, basically saying that, like, when people are given the choice, they will make the selfish decision, essentially. And so at the end of the episode, he ends up killing himself. It seems like I was wrong about that whole situation. I thought that's what the episode was going to be about, because I thought there was some kind of supernatural element to that whole blood thing at the end of the episode, what happened to Jamie Kennedy's character. Well, it comes up this episode that basically this guy is involved in that situation, those vials or whatever. It still begs the question where they came from, but the poison is actually that. I was thinking oh, he used this supernatural blood or whatever to basically make this situation happen. So it's like, oh yeah, he got his hands on it from Jamie Kennedy. I thought that's what that was about, but it's like, no, well, yeah, he got it from him, but it was probably a situation where it probably was originally supposed to go to him anyway, so he found out his whole package got intercepted, so that's why the episodes are connected. Not unless there's a bigger plot of where did this blood, where those vials specifically came from. I keep saying blood, but they're just, this whole sickness thing, this poison, so it's kind of interesting finding out that it's connected like that. Obviously, there's probably a lot more to it, but nevertheless. But luckily, Lucifer, he ended up telling Chloe to go get as far away from him, obviously chase after Jason. As trust me, I can get in there without there being any problems. She's like, okay, she trusted him, got far enough away. He was able to, go into devil mode. I mean, not necessarily devil mode, but kind of be back into immortal mode and is able to save the day. And he's like, oh yeah, I did it. I told you. She's like, oh my God, I'm so glad you're okay. And he's like, and it's finally sinks. He's like, this is real. It's real. This is really real. And it's they hug and everything. And afterwards, Lucifer is on top of the world until it comes crashing down, because it's Charlotte ended up convincing Maze. It's we need to tell Lucifer the truth, because she told Maze the truth. At first, Maze is whatever, who cares, yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, it was have you ever wondered why is it out of anyone, the only person in the world that makes Lucifer mortal is her? So obviously you got to know there's something more to it. They're about to sit him down, but for him, he's for the first time, he feels oh, we're on the right path. Nothing can bring him down. And before Charlotte could say anything, Maze is nah, let's get out of here. Let's go. And then Charlotte's we said this was for his sake. And then Maze is not stupid. She's this isn't for his sake. You have an ulterior motive. And that's kind of what Linda pointed out too, is you do have some ulterior motive to the reason why you don't you want Lucifer to know this bit of information. And she's like, Dad, she's like, oh, but when discussing it with me, she's like, no, I'm doing this for his sake and stuff like, it's like, no. She tries to pretend like, oh, she's a perfect mother doing this for her son's happiness. Like, no, she's doing this because she gets something out of this, because she wants to go back home. She can pretend, like, she even pretends like she cares about Amenadel. What she cares about is power. That's all she cares about. She wants to get back the throne that was taken from her. She was banished by God, and she wants that throne back. And so, but without them even saying anything, Lucifer ends up seeing a picture at the bar, and it's Amenadel with Chloe's mom, and he finds out the truth, and he runs away because you see it, and it's the most heartbreaking thing is you see Lucifer's heart broken because he was like, oh man, this is real. Like it was real. It's one of the most realest things in his life. He felt good. He felt happy, and then in that moment, it was all taken from him because he came to realize everything, their entire partnership, their friendship, everything he's ever felt for Chloe, just enjoying being around her. Like, Chloe's the main reason why he stayed on Earth. He wanted to stay on Earth was because of her. Like, everything he's ever done has revolved around Chloe because he cares so much about her, and at this point even loves her. And to find out that was all a fabrication, that they were brought together on purpose. Because at the end of the day, like the whole situation comes down to, a theological discussion of, is there such thing as, is life predestined, or is free will an actual thing? And I like to believe that free will is a situation. Like, the fact is, I guess in a sense of the way, like, it's a combination of both. Like, life can go down, there's multiple destination points of life. Oh, life could go this way, life can go that way. There's many different paths because life branches off in many different directions. But what it comes down to is what path you go down to is choices. The fact is, Chloe might have been brought into his life, that she might be a miracle child that God had Amenadel kind of bring into existence. But that doesn't change the fact that it was Lucifer's choice, getting to know her, to be around her. It's because of who Chloe is, who Lucifer is, that brought them together, and why they become such a good team. I love that whole situation when they were at that party and whatever. At first, Chloe was super pissed because she saw him smiling after, going upstairs with that girl. But they sat around, they were getting high and just having a conversation. He's like, how do I know if it's real? She's like, if the fact is that, you two halves come together and you work better together than you can do apart. And she bursts in, she's like, Lucifer, I can't believe you're doing this. And he's like, what are you doing? And it's like, oh yeah, we're kind of having this conversation. And they're like, oh, you're the one that he was talking about. It's like, you're so pretty. It's like, oh, thank you. And it was the whole conversation about her in a sense of, because, trying to discover like whether it was real between them or not. So, but dude, like I said, I truly believe that, at the end of the day, it was their choice to come together. God might have laid the foundation. He might have put them there, but it was his choice to be where he is right now, to be with Chloe. Like, his feelings aren't fabricated. Her feelings aren't. They are naturally drawn together. Like, they found their way to each other. Like, so. But it's a situation because it's like, Lucifer has some serious dad issues, and finding out that the person that he cares about is just part of this whole grand scheme of thing. Because the fact is, Lucifer originally believed that. He originally was like, oh, like, God obviously put you in my way. The reason why I'm the way I am around you and stuff like that. Like, to him, he was like, oh yeah, God put you in my way. That's the only way. Because also talking about the fact is that his powers didn't work on him. That was another reason. Which, he ended up finding out because he tried it on her, and she's like, Lucifer, that whole thing doesn't work on me. He's like, right, I was just kidding. So it's still a situation like that. But nevertheless, at the very end, he tries to confront her. It's like, oh, did you know? And, Chloe doesn't know anything about this whole supernatural thing, about the beings and stuff like that, like celestial beings and stuff, like who he is, that she was kind of put in this pathway. But then she turns around and she's bleeding because she's, like, I only assume she's poisoned too. I can only assume when he slit his throat open, like, she was in close enough proximity that she got poisoned. Not like, because can't think of any other point where he could have poisoned her. Not unless she got too close to his body, and before he did that, he poisoned himself. And when he slit his throat, it got, the poison particles went into the air, and she ended up inhaling it. I don't know. Like, we'll just kind of have to wait and see how that all plays out next episode. That's super depressing. It's just like, it's one thing after another. It's like all Lucifer can do is lose. So I hope everything works. Like, I'm so interested to see where this all plays out, how things will be. It's like struggling with the new revelation, what Lucifer knows, but also dealing with the fact is that Chloe's in this particular situation. So, because I want Chloe and Lucifer to be together, but it's like, you have his mom and Amenadiel plotting, and then at the same time finding out that basically him and Chloe being together is part of his father's plot, and it's like he's kind of the rebel, and to find out, it's like he thought he was making his own choices being here, and it's like, it even brings into question, like, him being here on Earth. It's like, was that even his own choice, or was that something God planned for him too? So, I mean, there was even that whole thing in the season 1 of like being like, oh, please, it's like, oh, save Chloe's life, obviously, and he would, go back in exchange for him saving Chloe's life. It's kind of a promise he made. So it's kind of a situation of like, oh, does that mean that like basically even that was a lie? Because the fact is you were never going to take Chloe because you're always going to keep her here because you want her and me to be like, that is the question. Like, I think, like, I would wholeheartedly believe it is a situation where it's like, God wanted Lucifer he wanted Lucifer to see, kind of like the conversation of Lucifer to see the good in himself. He wanted someone to be there for Lucifer to see that in himself. And it's like, to find someone that he could be vulnerable around. I don't know. Maybe Chloe isn't there in Lucifer's life for that particular reason. Maybe there's another reason why Chloe, being the way she is, like the reason why she makes him the way he is. And it, like, it still begs the question, because is it only Lucifer she does that to, or is she that way for someone else? Like, is she meant to be like a weakness for someone else, or is it specifically Lucifer? I don't know, so many questions. Obviously, that's just me thinking out loud. Obviously, she is tailored, to block Lucifer's immortality or whatever. So, like I said, we just kind of have to wait to see how it all plays out. It was, again, just very good episode. Just love that whole element of them, both of them trying to be someone a little different because they're like questioning another situation. She wants to be someone a little more spontaneous to, catch his attention because it's like, because even she probably realizes like, we haven't had sex yet. It's like, all he's ever done is talk about sex. And it's like, now we have an opportunity. We kissed and everything. We just walked away. And for him, he wants to find out if it was real or not, which now he, once again, is questioning it even more so than he was before. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.